I'm Mariam Shahin, a filmmaker, and I've been working in and around Gaza for 30 years. As a year of genocidal warfare by Israel in Gaza drew to a close, I looked back at the Gazans I had met over the years and wondered what had happened to them and how their lives had changed forever. These are echoes of a lost Gaza. In 1967, Gaza was occupied by the Israeli army. They withdrew their troops 38 years later. And it was then that I moved to Gaza, where I found a mood of optimism. I heard the people talk of Gaza becoming the Singapore of the Mediterranean, a small place with big potential. In the summer of 2005, we filmed with these high school students about to graduate. They belonged to the elite, studying at the American International School. All were full of optimism. Hala Abdul Wahab was the class president.
Are we graduates? We are delegates of a better future, diplomats of AISG, Palestine, and humanity. Thank you.
Back then, hope was everywhere. These were the young people, the next generation, who would help Gaza achieve a bright future. But everything turned out differently. Israel's renewed onslaught on Gaza began at the end of 2008 and continued into 2009. I wondered what had become of those happy young people I had met at the graduation, and I managed to speak to Yasmin Khudari, who was studying at the American University of Cairo.
Hello, Yasmin. It's Mariam. I'm calling from Ramallah.
I saw that two F-16 bombs destroyed the school to rubble and ashes, and that there is nothing left, and that they killed the guard who has been the guard for the last 8 years. And I saw that there is nothing left in the school, and that the future of the students of the school is like buried under the rubble now.
Fast forward 15 years, and I met Yasmin again in Cairo, where she now lives with her husband and 3 children. Like many Gazans, Yasmin struggles to process the enormity of the current war on Gaza.
Part of me still, I think, is in denial. And I think, like many Palestinians in my situation, we haven't had time to actually grieve or deal with what's happening in any way. Still very much in denial, still haven't come to terms with the reality that exists in Gaza now. I was there exactly 12 months ago with the kids. I had taken them at least twice a year since I had them. So our connection as a small family to Gaza is very, very strong. So now I don't know how to describe the situation I'm in, or how I'm dealing with it, or if I'm dealing with it. I think I'm just on survival mode, as in just wanting to make sure that everyone I love who's still in Gaza is safe and sound, safe. Beyond that, I really have no capacity to think or to plan or to wish or to hope. And so I have very little hope for the future. because I don't want to be betrayed again.
Back in 2005, I met Jawdat El-Khudari, an antiquities collector and connoisseur. We sat in his remarkable garden, surrounded by fruit trees and honeybees, cacti, and singing birds. Jawdat had collected fantastic antiquities from Gaza's storied past.
This is the original Gaza. If you want to see and imagine how Gaza looks in modern years, until in the past, you can see Gaza. That's it, as simple as.
Jawdat showed me the many artifacts he had collected, some dating back to the Philistine era. He had turned his spacious home into a makeshift museum.
2,500 years BC. This is the oldest piece which I have.
Jawdat owned a construction company, but his true passion was preserving things from Gaza's rich past. In the Arab world, Gaza is known as the city of Hashem, a reference to the Prophet Muhammad's grandfather, a merchant who worked and died in Gaza. Down through the centuries, the grave of Hashem and the mosque which houses it became a pilgrimage site for Muslims from all over the world.
Gaza, in general, either in heritage, in economy, in business, in politics, just need a hope for better future. Give the people here a hope for the future.
In 2008, Jawdat donated his antiquities collection to the Gaza Museum, which he helped finance. But then Israel launched another war on Gaza, and I wondered if the museum, together with Gaza's other cultural sites, had been damaged. I met Jawdat in Ramallah, where he happened to be when the war began.
ممكن نحكي تقريبا فشل، ويمكن هذه لأول مرة بالتاريخ حرب هالشراسة هذا والدمر هذه، والسكان المدنيين ما عندهم فرصة إنهم حتى يغادروا مكان الحرب.
By 2024, Israel had launched its most destructive war on Gaza ever, and I wondered with increasing concern what had become of Jawdat and his family. And also, was his museum with Gaza's priceless treasures still intact?
والكل كان يعتقد إنه مسألة أيام أو أسابيع أو حتى أشهر قليلة حتى تخلص الحرب. الحرب على كل الشعب، ولا مش بس على الشعب، مش على الإنسان، على الإنسان وعلى الحجر وعلى الحيوان وعلى الطير، على كل شيء ممكن. تمام. أي مظهر من مظاهر الحياة في غزة كان يفضل القضاء عليها.
Jawdat took his family to safety early on in the war. The antiquities collector was acutely aware that his home and adjacent museum could be targeted just like other cultural institutions across Gaza.
لم يبقى شيء من المتحف. المتحف بعد ما بعثوا لي صور، يا ريته المتحف، يا ريتهم هدوا، كان اسهل علي، لانه اعتقد وصل لمرحله محتاج ازاله كليه. تمام. من حجم الدمار وحجم الخراب وحجم الحرائق اللي تم إشعالها، وأنا بصراحة متفاجئ من العقلية اللي تنم على حقد وكره لكل شيء يمس الشعب الفلسطيني في غزة.
The one thing Jawdat still has is the archived digital photos of his historic collection from Gaza's past.
تفضل سيد الفاضل. عملة يونانية ضرب غزة القرن الرابع قبل الميلاد. تقليد لعملة أثينا العظيمة. الإسكندر المقدوني وكنزه اللي تم اكتشافه في بحر غزة.
This is Shati refugee camp, situated on the Gazan coast. It was established in 1948 as a makeshift home for Palestinian refugees. They had fled to Gaza from surrounding villages occupied by the Israeli army. Israel never allowed them to return, and successive generations of refugees continue to live here. In 2005, I met a group of refugee girls who were hoping to transcend their ghetto life and achieve something against the odds. They were the one and only Palestinian girls rowing team. 16-year-old Fatima Nasser was the team's lead rower.
كانت رغبتي إني أشارك في المسابقات هذه، وإن أنا يعني أرفع رأس فلسطين، وإن أنا بشارك يعني إنه في بنت بتشارك لسه في مسابقات تانية، وأصلاً أنا بحب يعني المسابقات.
Fatima and her team had trained for years on these machines. Back then, they were waiting for the delivery of rowing boats to Gaza. But the boats never came. They were seized by the Israelis for so-called security reasons.
أملي إنه يوصل هذا المشروع لكل العالم، وإن إحنا نعمل مسابقات مع كل الدول التانيين ونتشارك، وإن إحنا يعني نفرج للعالم إنه فلسطين بتقدر تنجز حاجات كبيرة.
The girls had expected things would change after the Israeli withdrawal in 2005, but like for other Palestinians, such hopes were all in the past. More than 3 years later, I tried to contact Fatima to find out how she had coped with the war. I was concerned since I knew her home was close to the house of the now late Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, a likely target for the Israeli army.
أول ما بدأ اليهود الهجوم على غزة، كنا إحنا في المدارس، وفجأة ما سمعنا إلا صوت صواريخ بتنزل. كانت ورا مدرستنا، كان في المشتل أو يعني قريب منا. طب إحنا اللي زينا مش عارفين إيش نسوي، سيبنا المدرسة وروحنا على الدار. يعني بأي لحظة كان الخطر ممكن يصيبنا. يعني الولاد كانوا مروحين من المدرسة والصواريخ بتنزل، فلقيت أخواتي بطلنا نعرف ننام في الليل. الزنانة 24 ساعة شغالة، والصواريخ من كل جهة بتشتغل، ومستقبلنا إحنا كله ضاع. أصلا أنا خايفة بين دقيقة ودقيقة إنه الصاروخ ينزل علينا. طب إحنا اللي زينا يعني بيتنا اسبست، واخواتي هدول كنا 6 انفار، يعني احنا خايفين باي دقيقه ينزل صاروخ يقتلنا كنا. طب احنا بدنا نعيش، انا لسه ما عشتش كثير واخواتي لسه ما عاشوا، احنا بدنا نعيش زي الشعوب الثانيه.
Throughout 2024, we made many attempts to locate Fatima in Gaza. We know that the Shati refugee camp, Fatima's home, is now largely destroyed. Finally, we were able to contact one of her former trainers, who told us that Fatima and her family are now safe and sound in Turkey. Despite Israel's withdrawal, Palestinians in Gaza remain surrounded and occupied. In 2007, I wanted to gauge the brain drain as the middle class sought to leave. I met Ibrahim Al-Af, a mental health counselor. Back then, only 40% of Gazans still had jobs. Ibrahim was one of them. He actually had 3 jobs, just to keep him and his family afloat. He was also one of the many well-educated Gazans who had applied to emigrate.
The situation in Gaza has really deteriorated over the past few years, ever since the start of the Intifada. Until the coming of Hamas, things were not really bad. But with the coming of Hamas and even the stop and the blockade enforced by the United States and Europe, and the drop down in the rate of the dollar, this caused the economy to really go into a state of almost chaos. The level of poverty and hardship has increased a lot.
In 2007, Ibrahim and Suhad were expecting twins. The couple already had 4-year-old triplets, Mohammed, Aboud, and Lulu. Ibrahim and Suhad began thinking of emigrating when the situation in Gaza took a turn for the worse, following the outbreak of fighting between the Fatah and Hamas parties the previous year.
The economic situation is not the real cause for me to leave. It's the security and the welfare of my children. This is what really making me thinking of leaving. The last factional skirmishes, they were really disastrous. And the street downstairs was a battlefield almost, with mines, masked people, and so on. So I'm using techniques, mental health techniques, to try to counter the effect of the continuous cycle of violence that we are living in. But it's not good enough. My little girl is drawing people, masked people with guns. She's afraid of being shot at. I'm trying to immigrate for the past almost year and a half.
What are the places you have in mind? Where would you go to?
Anywhere except for Baghdad, Somalia, and Afghanistan. Any other place would be good enough. There are no embassies here in Gaza. We are cut off the world, as they say.
Ibrahim was alienated from the rest of the world. Being a Palestinian refugee, he was officially stateless and had no passport.
It's not the issue of leaving. I don't have any traveling documents to leave with. This is not the problem that I suffer along from. Almost 100,000 people living in Gaza are having the same problem.
Ibrahim didn't give up on his dream to leave Gaza.
I'm applying for immigration in several places where we have, like Canada, Australia, and so on.
2 years after first meeting Ibrahim and his family, I managed to track them down to see how they had coped under Israel's bombardment. But they were still stuck there.
We have been forced to leave our home. We live in an area which is close by to many governmental buildings and military sites. It was really unsafe. The room that you're seeing us here, this is a living room in the day and a sleeping room in the night. This house holds almost 4 families. We sleep together just for the company and to feel safe, safer in the crowds, as they say. Leaving there, it was very fast. We did not take our belongings. We have basically 2 sets of change for each one of us. So whenever one gets dirty, it has to be washed. Not to mention, of course, the problem of the electricity and water. We were cut off water and electricity for almost 1 week. We really thought it was really a disaster not having water and electricity in a house with children.
In 2014, Ibrahim and his family were able to leave Gaza and rebuild their lives in Sweden. In June 2024, Ibrahim's former employer, the Gaza Community Mental Health Program, released a devastating report about conditions in Gaza. Genocide survivors speak of excruciating mental pain, loss, panic, anger, helplessness, and thoughts of suicide. Since the war began, 2 of the 3 mental health clinics have been destroyed and the 3rd damaged. Many staff psychologists, including 3 women, have been killed. Back in 2005, I met Basil Nasser, a development worker and entrepreneur who had spent over $100,000 on a restaurant business. Many Palestinians invested in the local economy, confident that with the Israelis gone, Gaza would prosper. But dining out became an increasingly difficult and perilous thing to do. When I met up with Basil again in 2007, his restaurant was barely operational and he wanted to leave Gaza. He and his family had applied for and obtained immigration papers for Canada. I met Basil just before he left.
Most of them leave Gaza because of the economic situation and because getting some job, because over the past few years, due to the security situation, most of the businesses have closed down and we have no foreign investors coming to inject money in Gaza. So there are no more jobs to be created here. I'm leaving for a different reason. Mainly the future of my kids and the security.
Basil and his wife Ahlam asked their 5 children to vote on whether they wanted to stay in Gaza or emigrate to Canada. 16-year-old Mahmoud was the most eloquent of his siblings.
I vote to leave.
Why?
Because Canada is a better place than Gaza, and I intend to be a better place. That's my dream. In Canada, there's more opportunities for people to have their dream come true.
Basil's wife Ahlam could no longer hide her worries about moving her family to a foreign country.
من شوي صعب بس بتأمل يعني نتجاوز هاي المحنة كمان يعني إشي مش سهل إنك تفكر إنك تطلع من بلدك لبلد تانية إلا إشي يعني غصب عنا.
Basil and his family left Gaza in the summer of 2008, just 6 months before Israel launched another war. But after becoming a Canadian citizen, Basil and some of his children returned to Gaza.
Some of my kids decided to go back to Gaza and explore things there. They managed to find some jobs, and they got married also in Gaza during that time.
On the 7th of October 2023, Basil, his 3 sons, and their families were in Gaza.
We woke up on the sounds of rocket. It's a war, you know.
Basil and his family fled the bombardment of northern Gaza where they were staying. They remained on the road in makeshift shelters for 40 days.
And you cannot imagine, there is no space to walk. Queues on the bathrooms and showers, and food is getting less and less every day. And what made the things worse for us is that our home was also severely damaged, almost destroyed. The restaurant of my kids also was damaged, you know, beside the news of the killing of 70 of my family.
The Canadian government pushed to have Basil and his family evacuated from the war zone that Gaza became.
We crossed and we left Rafah crossing, and we arrived Cairo at 3 a.m. And they are now back in Canada.
Basil's experience in development work made him an ideal choice to join plans for the rebuilding of Gaza.
I was called to join the new Palestinian government. I've been appointed as a Minister of State for Relief Affairs.
Even though the war's not over, I'm very grateful that so many of the Gazans I know have survived the onslaught. Their talent and dedication will one day be needed to rebuild Gaza. When I moved there in 2005, Palestinians in Gaza were just beginning to recover from a 38-year occupation by Israel. People were hopeful that their lives would improve. But in the end, their dreams have been destroyed, and all that remains are echoes of a lost Gaza. By 2009, Gaza was reeling from the devastating effects of the first Israeli war on the enclave since their withdrawal 4 years earlier. The air, land, and sea blockade continued after the 2009 war. Even the most basic supplies were prevented from entering Gaza. This is the story of one man we met in 2009 who worked against all odds to fix his desperately broken world.
أنا اسمي منذر الداية، عمري 40 سنة. أنا أهلي كانوا في يافا وهاجروا في 48 على غزة. أنا من سكان معسكر الشاطئ. أنا أعول أسرة من 8 أفراد، عندي 5 بنات و3 أولاد، وأنا مهنتي ميكانيكي. في 2007 ضربوا شركة الكهرباء وبلشت عاد لقيتها ما فيش إنارة. بلشت الناس يعني تشتري مولدات، بلشت تيجي الموتوسيكلات والمولدات الموتورات والجنراتور وبلشت الشغل يعني. بعديها طبعا خلص انشهرنا. دار الداية عالم انه بيصلحوا موتوسيكلات، يعني احنا الوحيدين في غزة بنصلح اللي هو الموتوسيكلات والمولدات. يعني زي ما بيقولوا الميكانيكي عشان تصل تكون ميكانيكي بدك عمل اقل حاجة 30 او 40 سنة لما تفهم التقنية او الشغل الصح تبعت الميكانيكي، مش اي واحد بيدخل ميكانيكي.
Every week, Munzer rode down to Gaza's southernmost city on the Egyptian border, Rafah. Here he found motorcycles and generators smuggled in through tunnels from Egypt.
الموتوسيكلات دخلت ايام ما فتحوا الجدار. الناس ما خلتش شغلتين في مصر او 3 شغلات، صارت تجيب المعيز والموتوسيكلات والمولدات.
A network of tunnels from Gaza to Egypt became one of the only ways to bring in essential goods.
شغل الأنفاق يعني كلهيته شغل سحب، بيجوا مكسرين. إذا أنا بدي أجيب 10 مواتير أو 10 مولدات حيطلع منهم 3 أو 4 مكسرين. قبلنا بالسلام وقبلنا في المعاهدات اللي بتصير بيننا وبين اليهود، بس احنا مش شايفين اي مقابل، يعني مش شايفين لا فك حصار لا فك معابر، مش شايفين اي حاجه اللي تحسسنا انه احنا يعني عايشين زي باقي الناس.
In the war on Gaza that began in October 2023, Munzer and his family became homeless when they were forced to flee their concrete home in the Shati refugee camp. With one son in a wheelchair and the rest on foot, he escaped the bombardments on his camp and is now housed in a tent city in southern Gaza.
ايش مالكم؟ ايش فيه؟ تتقتلوش على المية، لقيت في نعبى مية تقلقوش. هيدر خالي وضعهم الله بيعلم فيه، وهي العطيلة لا شغلة ولا مشغلة، وهذا مثلها ولد ومثلها بنت وضعها صعب. وهذه شوف فت شاي بيعملوا الأولاد من قلة الأكل والشرب، وهيها جوزها في غزة وهي مرمية هان هي أولادها وحالها بالمرة. وهذه جوزها مسيبها شهداء الأقصى وهي رماها هنا وجابها من وضعها. هات أورجيك هنا أورجيك وضعه. هذه دار أخويا، هذه دار أختي، هذه دار بنتي، هاي أختي. شوف كيف منظرها، أجت 200 كيلو صارت 10 كيلو. الله يكون بالعون. أورجيك الشقة الثانية. هاي المأساة. هذول كيف في الشتاء بدهم يتحملوا أنا مش عارف. إحرامات. هذه الخيمة باسوا الإيدين. هذه ابن أختي كله نايلون مخزق. أورجيك حتى كمان يا ريت. أول بداية الحرب كنت شغال في إسرائيل، فأجوا اعتقلونا وودونا على اللي هو سجن في رهط. بعد 23 يوم روحونا طريق كرم أبو سعد. صرت أنا أتواصل مع العيلة إني أنا أعرفوا إن هم، تفاجأت إن هم لسه في معسكر الشر.
As the Israeli army approached Gaza and their adjacent refugee camp, Munzer and his family headed for the so-called safe zone in Rafah in the deep south.
قعدنا في تل السلطان في مدرسة، قعدنا تقريبا 4-5 شهور. ايوه تفاجأنا قالوا بدهم يجتاحوا رفح. اجينا على الزوايد، قعدنا في الزوايدة. أنا من أول يوم دخلناه في الزوايدة وإحنا يعني معاناة رفح أهون من معاناة الزوايدة. لا أكل ولا شرب ولا شغل ولا مية ولا مية حلوة، يعني وضع مأساة جدا. إيش الدعوة؟ إيش فيه؟ زرقونا يا أولاد. خلص هذه عشان شو اسمه خليها. هات هذا خلص بتعبوا لي هذه. يلا ان شاء الله الله بريحنا. فقدت اخويا ومرت اخويا واختي والحجه تبعتي. تمام. هذول ضربوا دار قبال الدار اللي هم فيها، والحمد لله يعني ربنا فقدهم برحمته. فاستشهد اخويا ابو فادي ومرت اخويا واختي، والحجه الله يرحمها يعني ما كملتش وراحت بالمرقه تبعته. فاحنا مش عارفين كيف بدنا نعيش ونعتاش ونكمل هالايام، ونتمنى من الله انه ما تطول.
One of my enduring impressions of life in Gaza has always been the strength and endurance of its people, and the role that women play in keeping this besieged part of Palestine on its feet. Umayya Juha was one of these women.
I was born in the city of Gaza in 1972, but I am part of a family of refugees from Al-Muharraqa, one of Palestinian villages that was attacked by the invading Zionists in 1948. Growing up in Gaza, we lived in a very simple home. I remember how the rain used to dribble through the roof. Our family was dispersed. My father was far away, and my mother overburdened with responsibilities. I captured this unpleasant life with my quill even before I went to school.
Umayya's daughter, Noor, wanted to follow in her mother's artistic footsteps.
During my secondary schooling, I began reading newspapers, and of course the cartoons on the back page of Al-Quds, which was the newspaper I read every day.
Umayya was the sole woman in a club of at least 12 cartoonists whose work was published in newspapers right across the occupied West Bank and Gaza. One of Umayya's cartoons prompted a backlash when she depicted then Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon as a boastful politician, oblivious to dead Israeli soldiers, standing decapitated behind him. The newspaper Al Risala printed Umayya's cartoon. The next day, Israel bombed Al Risala newspaper. While badly damaged, Al Risala began printing again, and Umayya continued to be one of their featured cartoonists. For the first day of Ramadan in 2008, she depicted the bloody Hamas-Fatah split. She drew a Palestinian mother on her balcony, praying to heaven that her children might eat their Ramadan meal at the same table together again.
Unfortunately, we are living in a time when our people are divided and splintered. It's a good time for a cartoonist to become both a commentator and observer.
As the latest war ravaged northern Gaza, we searched for Umayya, who we knew lived there. We eventually reached her by phone. She was concerned for the security of her family, so declined to be filmed, but agreed to a voice interview instead.
حياك الله أختي مريم. لا أزال بخير، لا أزال ضمن الأحياء. طبعا الأوضاع لا تزال سيئة للأسف الشديد. كل يوم قصف، كل يوم ضحايا، كل يوم شهداء، كل يوم جرحى. الوضع الأمني جدا جدا خطير هنا بغزة. أنا طبعا بشمال غزة. أكيد أشياء كتير 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 تغيرت في حياتي ما بعد اللقاء اللي صار. طبعا يمكن أنت ما بتعرفي، زوجي اللي أنتوا صورتوه في تلك الفترة برضو استشهد، اللي صورتوه معي على البحر برضو استشهد. وبعد كده أنا تزوجت طبعا في 2012، ويعني لا يزال زوجي معي، ربنا يطول بعمره. كان بيتي موجود في عمارة كانت أول عمارة استهدفت في الحرب الحالية على قطاع غزة. فأنا بكلمك حاليا من موقع نزوح، مش في بيتي، بعد ما فقدت من أرشيف أعمال أو جوائز أو شهادات ودروع عربية أو محلية أو دولية، بالإضافة إلى مكتبتي أيضا. طبعا أنا لم أنجب إلا نور البنت اللي أنت شفتيها وهي صغيرة، يعني هي عمرها ستصبح 22 عام، اتزوجت قبل عام. للأسف إجت الحرب كتير، يعني كانت صعبة أيضا على منطقة سكناها، برضو اتدمر بيتها.
Umayya continued to produce cartoons under bombardment and shared some of her work with us. Israel's current war on Gaza claimed the lives of tens of thousands of children. They have always been the most cherished blessing of Palestinian families, many of whom feel that a life without children is incomplete. In 2007, we filmed with a Palestinian fertility doctor, helping couples in Gaza fulfill their greatest wish. Triplets Sarah, Ahmed and Huda were the latest of Gaza's 5,000 test tube babies. Their conception came at great expense and brought much joy to this family of Palestinian refugees.
كتير مهم امتداد لذكرى الوالد، امتداد لعائلة، امتداد لبلد، لوطن، لتراث في بلدنا. ضروري ضروري.
Back in 1997, Dr. Tharwat El-Helu introduced IVF treatment to Gaza. Since then, he has been the godfather of many Palestinian miracle babies.
طبيعة احنا المجتمع تبعنا من اول 3-4 شهور 6 شهور بتصير المحيط بالاسرة تجبر الازواج الزوج والزوجة انه يروح يتعالج، مع انه المفروض انه العلاج يتم بعد 2 يتم الفحوصات، لكن احنا بنتفاجئ انه الازواج بتتردد علينا من اول 6 شهور من الزواج. حتى لو ما حصلش حل مشاكلها الاجتماعية بتؤدي الى الطلاق.
But social acceptance of IVF was slow in coming. Raghda Khawaja had 4 such treatments, 2 of which were successful. She was mother to 3-year-old Noor and to 6-month-old triplets.
يعني أنابيب مش طبيعي، يعني الزراعة. يعني طلعوا دعايات إنه الزراعة لا سمح الله يعني زي حرام، إشي زي هيك. بس يعني لما شافوا يعني الزراعة كترت في البلد وكترت الخلفة فيهم، يعني صار الناس يعني آمنوا، عرفتي كيف؟ صاروا يعملوا.
Although social concerns remained, IVF treatment was approved by religious leaders in Gaza.
الدين الإسلامي بيشجع الناس على التداوي. تداووا فإني مباهن.
Yasser and Mahassan Sakka had been married for 15 years. They feared a lifetime of ostracization if Mahassan didn't conceive. They had borrowed heavily to finance the next round of IVF treatment. In their case, the failure to conceive was diagnosed as a problem with Yasser's sperm. Because of this, Mahassan's fears of abandonment if she remained childless had lessened.
مهم جدا. مهم جدا. يعني بالذات انه لما بيجي ابن سلفة الصغير بقول لي خالته انت ليش ما بتجيبيش بيبي؟ انت ليش ما عندكيش بيبي؟ انت ليش زمان متجوزه ما عندكيش اولاد؟ انا بدي اولاد يعني حتى امبارح يعني. وبعدين ليش خالته اي حد بيسال يعني ليش ماما ليش ما خالته محاسن ما بتجيب بيبي يعني كثير. فبتحس يعني بصح انك بتوريش بتحس شويه يعني انا جباره شويه لكن الا ما تنهاري والا يعني ما.
Many Palestinians made great sacrifices to assure their dreams of having children came true, which makes the mass killing of children during this war all the more tragic. We made all efforts to locate Dr. Tharwat in Gaza without success. The 3-week 2008-2009 war left many of Gaza's young people despondent and without hope. But as so often in this Mediterranean part of Palestine, they found ways to cope and improve their dire circumstances.
أنا محمد جمال الجخبير من سكان مخيم خان يونس قطاع غزة. بمارس رياضة باركور ومعناتها اللي هو تخطي الحواجز والأمور هذه.
الله عبد الله
تعال محمد تعال. وين؟
أنا أول شيء اسمي عبد الله إنشاصي، العمر 22 سنة، سكان مخيم خان يونس للاجئين.
أنا في البداية كنت بمارس رياضة كرة السلة. ما كنت يعني بلعب جمباز شوية خفيف، فحكى لي عبد الله إنه في رياضة هيك باركور ومعناتها اللي هو تخطي الحواجز والأمور هذه. بدأ الأمر بشكل بسيط، يعني ما كناش متوقعين إنه الرياضة هذه تنغرس فينا بالشكل هذا.
يعني أنا ممكن أنط عن حاجز بحركة واللي معي ينط بحركة ثانية، هي بس تيجي كيف تطل الحاجز بأي طريقة ممكنة، يعني في حركة جمباز، قفز عادي، في حركة باركور. والباركور هي فلسفة يعني في الأول والآخر، يمكن واحد يطلع من حاجة بطريقة ثانية، يعني مش كل واحد يطلع حاجز بنفس الطريقة.
في مشكلة في الازدحام السكاني، يعني في كل عائلة بتلاقي في البيوت بتلاقي 20 نفر في البيت الواحد. طبعا حياتنا في المخيم حياة يعني بسيطة وبدائية، البيوت كلها أغلبها أسبست وهيك، يعني بنعتمد يعني بغالب الأحيان في المخيمات على اللي هو المساعدات اللي بتجينا من وكالة الغوث والوكالات الدولية. مش بس إنه الواحد بيكون مبسوط، بل بحس حاله يعني عمل شغلة يعني قليل من الناس بتقدر تسويها. يعني بحس إنه الشغلة مثيرة كتير، يعني إنه أنا بدي أخاطر بحياتي أو بدي أخاطر بصحتي عشان أنفذ حركة أو شغلة ما حدش عملها قبلي، إنه أنا أكون مميز دايماً. سيب ابعد،
انزل
ابعد سيب.
خلاص محمد اعصابك.
طلع
انزل يا عم
انزل. بدي الف وجهي يا زلمه.
نزلوا يا محمد اعصابك.
خلاص سيبني. الرياضة هذه كانت يعني تعطينا دفعة كبيرة في إنه نصمد قدام كل هالحواجز هذه، وإنه ما نضعفش في أي لحظة ولا نخلي الاحتلال هذا إنه يسيطر علينا بأي فكر وبأي شكل.
يعني كل إنسان فيه مشاكل ما بيقدر يطلعها، لأنها صعب، إنه الحياة بتكون صعبة من حواليه. إذا كانت مش من الحروب أو من الحصار بكون في داخل الإنسان كبد يعني الواحد يبدأ عايش في اكتئاب. بس الأمور هذه يعني نقدر نحاول نطلع منها يعني بإيدينا إحنا.
بحلم إنه لقدام الواحد يقدر طبعاً يسافر لبرا، يشارك في بطولات وفي مسابقات عالمية بتصير في مختلف دول العالم، وأي حدا حب يشارك فيها بيقدر، باستثناءنا إحنا، لأنه هنا طبعاً إحنا منعزلين عن العالم الخارجي، يعني إحنا في قفص من كل جهة، إحنا محاصرين، يعني من الشمال من الشرق من الجنوب من الغرب، وين ما تروح في حصار.
In 2024, we found Mohammed in Sweden, demonstrating against the war of that year, along with his 2 young daughters. His free-running partner Abdullah gave up parkour following an accident. He now lives in Italy and raises money for his family. With the war not over, I feel heartbroken thinking about all Gazans and wonder about the lives forever changed by the Israeli onslaught that has destroyed so many families. I'm certain that everyone in this film hopes one day to play a role in the rebuilding of their home, Gaza.